Penguin Random House presents Speaking of Films by Satyajit Ray. Read by Luke Kenny. About the author. Satyajit Ray was born on the 2nd of May, 1921 in Calcutta. He is generally regarded as India's greatest filmmaker ever, with films like Pather Panchali 1955, Charulata 1964, Shatranj Ke Khiladi 1977, and Ghare Baire in 1984 to his credit. In 1992, he was awarded the Oscar for Lifetime Achievement by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and in the same year, he was also honored with the Bharat Ratna. Apart from being a filmmaker, Satyajit Ray was a writer of repute. In 1961, he revived the Bengali children's magazine Sandesh, to which he contributed numerous poems, stories, and essays over the years. He has to his credit a series of bestsellers featuring the characters Feluda, Professor Shanku, and Uncle Tarini, as well as several collections of short stories. In 1978, Oxford University awarded him its D.Litt degree. Satyajit Ray died in Calcutta in April 1992. About the translator. Gopa Majumdar has translated several works from Bengali to English, the most notable of those being Ashapura Devi's Subarnalata, Taslima Nasrin's My Girlhood, and Bibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay's Aparajito, for which she won the Sahitya Academy Award in 2001. She has translated several volumes of Satyajit Ray's short stories, a number of Professor Shanku's stories, and all of the Feluda stories for Penguin Books India. Foreword. Fans of Satyajit Ray's cinema will certainly be familiar with Our Films, Their Films, a collection of his writings on cinema that was published in 1976. Readers and moviegoers outside of Bengal may not have heard, however, of Bishoy Chalachitra, a compilation of Ray's articles on cinema written in Bengali. These articles were written over a span of 25 years and address issues not covered in Our Films, Their Films. The first article in Bishoy Chalachitra dates back to 1955. The year that Pather Panchali, Ray's first film, was released. The remaining pieces in the book deal with various aspects of Indian and international cinema and contain extremely interesting comments from Ray on his own art. This is the very first time that Bishoy Chalachitra is appearing in translation, and thus, for the first time, readers outside Bengal will be able to read these lost pieces on cinema by the master filmmaker. I must commend Gopa Majumdar for her marvelous translation that brings Ray's writings to life in English. Speaking of Films also contains My Life, My Work, the text of the Amal Bhattacharjee lecture that Satyajit Ray delivered in 1982, which is being published in book form for the very first time. Speaking of Films is being published on the 50th anniversary of the release of Pather Panchali, a fitting occasion for Ray's writings on cinema to reach out to newer audiences than ever before. I hope this book finds the widest readership across India as well as abroad. Kolkata, 2nd of May, 2005, Satyajit Ray. Chapter 1. My Life, My Work. Partial talkies and 100% talkies. When I was asked to deliver the annual lecture by the Amal Bhattacharjee Center for European Studies, my immediate response was to say no. It was easy for me to do so since 15 years of saying no to such requests has turned it into a habit. On the only occasion I didn't decline, the lecture never took place. Although I had, in the end, to yield to persuasion, a great deal of diffidence remains. It is difficult to disassociate the idea of discourse from the idea of erudition, especially in the present case, where the enterprise is meant to perpetuate the memory of an outstanding scholar. Now, erudition is something I singularly lack. As a student, I was only a little better than average, and in all honesty, I cannot say that what I learnt in school and college has stood me in good stead in the years that followed. I studied for a degree, of course, but my best and keenest memories of college consist largely of the quirks and idiosyncrasies of certain professors. College was fun, but college, at least for me, was hardly a fount of learning. All my useful reading has taken place after I finished my formal education. This reading has been wide and varied, but it has not been deep. Even on films, I am not particularly well read. When I got interested enough in films to start reading about them, there were hardly a dozen books in English on the subject. By the time I finished them, I was already at work on my first film. One day's work with camera and actors taught me more than all the dozen books had done. In other words, I learnt about filmmaking primarily by making films, not by reading books on the art of the cinema. Here, I must say, I am in very good company. This is how all the pioneers of filmmaking learnt their craft. But for a few exceptions, none of these pioneers was a learned scholar. Rather, they liked to think of themselves as craftsmen. If they were also able, on occasion, to produce works of art, they often did so intuitively. Or at least, that is how most of them feel. The famous American director, John Ford, was once asked by an admiring critic how he got the idea for a particularly felicitous touch in one of his films. Ford said, "Oh, I don't know, it just came to me." This brings me to the second reason for my diffidence. Filmmaking is such a demanding process that directors, especially those who keep up a steady output, rarely have time to assemble their thoughts. Of all the major directors in the world, only one, Sergei Eisenstein, lectured and theorized on cinema and described his own creative process at length. But we must remember that in the space of nearly 20 years, Eisenstein made only 7 films, of which 2 were never completed. I have regularly pursued my 2 vocations of filmmaking and writing for young people, untrammeled by any thoughts of ever having to describe or analyze why I do certain things the way I do them. Yet, a third reason concerns a special problem that faces one who must talk about films. Lectures on art should ideally be illustrated. One who talks on paintings usually comes armed with slides and a projector. This solves the difficulty of having to describe in words what must be seen with the eyes. The lecturer on music must bless the Silicon Revolution, which enables him to cram all his examples into a cassette no bigger than a small bar of chocolate. But the lecturer on cinema has no such advantage, at least not in the present state of technology in our country. If he wishes to cite an example, he can do no more than give a barely adequate description in words of what is usually perceived with all one's senses. A film is pictures, a film is words, a film is movement, a film is drama, a film is music, a film is a story, a film is 1,000 expressive oral and visual details. These days, one must also add that film is color. Even a segment of film that lasts barely a minute can display all these aspects simultaneously. You will realize what a hopeless task it is to describe a scene from a film in words. They can't even begin to do justice to a language which is so complex. So, when it was suggested that I talk on European cinema, I declined. I didn't wish to talk about films which would be unfamiliar to many of the listeners. Even reading about such films.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?